Okay. Okay, looks like we're live on YouTube. And I think I'm ready to go on Facebook as well. So I'm going to click the button there. It's giving me a little trouble on the Facebook side. Give me 1 second. I think I got this figured out though. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go live. Cool. Looks like we're now live. I'm just going to validate that it's all working. Really appreciate you coming on, Steve. This is really cool. I've been really looking forward to this one to ask you a few questions. So
sure, my pleasure. Glad
awesome
to be here, Jamon.
Yeah, appreciate it a lot. Just verifying if anybody's in the audience, if you can just give me a little chat. Let me know if everything sounds good, if you can hear Steve, if you can hear me. Looks like we have a few people who are tuned in. And I'll try to keep an eye on the chat to make sure if anybody asks for a question. Okay, Travis Wainio says all good. So I think we're on our way. Well, welcome, Steve. I appreciate it. This is the ALC Interviews series that I'm doing, just to kind of reintroduce it in case people are tuning in later, especially. This is a series of interviews of different people within the ALC who have done, I guess, interesting, unusual career paths and other things as well. I know there's a lot of very cool stories within the ALC, and I just kind of want to chat about it and have a chance for people to maybe ask questions and be exposed to a world that maybe they're a little unfamiliar with. And so, Steve, you're the third guinea pig of this series.
Right. Okay.
And I appreciate you being willing to come on. I play hockey with your son Brad.
Okay.
All the time, and so I asked him for your information, and he said, "Oh yeah, sure, yeah, you should talk to my dad." So that was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Letting people kind of filter in here a little bit. Just a little housekeeping. If you do ask questions in the chat, I'll try to pay attention to that, and I might fit them in questions to Steve as we go. But I may not see everything, just FYI. This is being live streamed on both YouTube and Facebook. So if someone is not on Facebook, there are quite a few people not on Facebook. I did post a link to the YouTube side of things in the chat, and you can send people the YouTube link. Don't post it publicly. This is, for our circles, but if you want to message it over to someone who wants to tune in, feel free. I think that's pretty much it with the intros. So I think I'll start off with our traditional start here, which is the whose boy are you, Steve? Can you tell us a little bit, like, who are your parents? Where did you grow up, like your early years?
Sure. Well, I was born in Upper Michigan in Hancock, and my parents are Al and B. Wuori. When I was 4, my dad was transferred to New Hampshire, actually 100 miles north of New Ipswich. He worked with the Corps of Engineers in cold regions research, and there was a new lab being built in Hanover to do cold regions research all around the world. And so he was transferred there when I was 4. So we moved as a family. And I grew up in Hanover, New Hampshire, which is the home of Dartmouth College, As I said, 100 miles north of New Ipswich, central part of the state, kind of on the Vermont border. And my siblings and I were there. There were three of us born in Michigan, in Hancock, my brother Rick, and living in Boise, and my sister Carol, now living in Henderson, Nevada. And then Patty was born my youngest sister was born in New Hampshire. So that was where I ended up growing up, graduating from high school in 1975 from Hanover High School. And so that's kind of the family connection and where I grew up and at least went to high school. And recognizing that as you interview people about these stories, Jamon, everybody has one. That's the interesting thing. Everybody has a story, and as Christians, we pray that that story is one of God's leading. And certainly, I have to say, in my life, I have known and felt that. And even though we sometimes don't see that or the evidence of it, he is there and he does guide us. And I really think that in what became kind of a different course for me and path, I really felt it was the hand of God.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that as well every time I interact with people and see where they've been and what they've done. It's just very striking. The path that different people take and how God has worked within each of their journeys, including my own, for sure. Yeah. So I know your brother Rick probably the best out of your siblings because his son is of course married to my sister, Dan and Meredith. But you grew up in Michigan and then of course New Hampshire for a while. What happened after you graduated high school then?
Well, in high school, I got a job when I was in the 11th grade at a place called Lou's Restaurant, which actually is better than the name would imply. You would think that a place called Lou's is one step up from a place called Eat, but Lou's is still to this day a very iconic restaurant in Hanover that serves the Dartmouth College community. And it was formed by a guy named Louis Brissett, who was a retired Marine, who served in World War II. And a friend of mine worked there. And when I was in my junior year in about February, we were sitting over lunch and he showed me his pay stub from the previous week. And I was impressed with that at $1.75 an hour. That makes quite a pay stub. Yeah. And he said, they're looking for somebody. So I wandered down the street and met Lou Brissett, and I got hired. And so every day after school at 3, I would trudge down the street to Lou's and be greeted with a whole floor full of pots, dirty pots. Because as soon as the cooks from 5 a.m. on knew that there was a kid hired to wash pots, they didn't wash a single one. And so there was literally 20 feet of solid pots all over the floor just to get to the sink. And I cleared that all out, got Tide dish soap or laundry soap, and I washed pots till 7 o'clock virtually every night and did a whole bunch of other stuff. And so that was really the first real job that I had. I'd mowed lawns and other things, but this was something where at $1.75 an hour, I was actually making some money. The problem is I was playing hockey also, and that the two tended to clash. But somehow I just didn't want to give up the job, and so I played hockey all the way through high school. Thought about playing at Michigan Tech, and I can come to that after. But I was thinking for a minute about staying at Lou's Restaurant. I had a couple of ambitions. One was to be a policeman, a cop, or a detective. And I almost went that route. In fact, I think if I would have been in the Hanover Town Police Department's cadet program in my junior year, that may have been the way that I went. But that wasn't what God had in mind. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll stay at Lou's. I had a motorcycle, I had a girlfriend, and I had good friends, and life was good. And by then I was up to $210 an hour. And so Lou Brissette, the Marine, he got wind of that. And one night he called me aside. He said, I hear you're thinking about staying here. And I said, well, Lou, I kind of like it here. And he said, if you try to do that, I'm going to kick your butt out on the sidewalk. He said, you've got things to do. You go on and get out of here. That was in the spring of 75. So that was when I moved to Michigan to go to Michigan Tech and for civil engineering, and spent the next 5 years there. So
your dad was an engineer, correct?
He was civil engineer. Yeah.
He also was a civil. So I assume that was sort of an influence in your decision to do that.
Yeah, it was. I wanted to go into engineering. Once I got the being a cop out of my system idea, I wanted to be an engineer, and the civil engineer seemed to be the one that would be most likely to work with real things, roads and bridges and buildings, and as it turns out, pipelines.
Sure.
But so that was the direction that I went. But certainly my dad's influence. And my brother Rick, my older brother Rick, also a civil engineer. So yes, that was an influence on me. But and we can come to this, but Exxon had an ad in the recruitment office in the year that I graduated, and it really struck me. And it said, we're looking for engineers that want to be engineers. That was the top half of the poster. And the bottom half of the poster said, we're also looking for engineers who don't.
Okay.
And I went, what in the world are they talking about? And then I realized that in my makeup, I really didn't think I was going to want to be an engineer forever, design engineer or anything like that. I somehow felt that I would not want to do that. And that ad kind of encouraged me that maybe there's the flexibility. Even though you're trained as an engineer and educated as an engineer, you don't have to be one forever. And I think it's one thing that a lot of young people get wrong when they say, well, I wouldn't want to take accounting and be an accountant all my life, or I wouldn't want to do this, or I wouldn't want to do that. No, those are just platforms to work from. They're not a post that you're tied to.
That's a really good point. The background in engineering and the education in engineering, obviously, and we'll talk about this more, has obviously been influential and helpful in your career. But from what I understand, there's been a lot more to it than that. There's been a lot of other aspects to what you've done over the years. So we'll definitely get to that. So you went to Michigan Tech. And then you saw that there. Did you apply then at Exxon?
No, I didn't. It's interesting how it worked out that I ended up in the oil and gas industry. So graduation comes. It's May of 1980. And for May graduates, typically the recruitment started back in November and December of, in this case, 1979. And I had done a bunch of interviewing, even the Jolly Green Giant from southern Minnesota. I interviewed with them and a number of other companies. And as it turned out, it was March of 1980. We already had our daughter Mandy, married to Russell Matson, although not at that time. And our son Brad, and Jackie was pregnant for our son Brad, and I was holding offers in Chicago and Detroit, and we did not want to move to Chicago or Detroit. We just really didn't. And this is now March, which is basically the recruiting season is over, and I kept cruising through the recruitment office every week, just in case. And all of a sudden one week, early March 1980, here's a new flyer. In those days, it was all paper, posted on the bulletin board. And it said, Lakehead Pipeline Company, Superior, Wisconsin, part of the largest oil pipeline system in the world, is looking for a civil engineer. And I couldn't believe my eyes. And I put my name down for an interview. They were coming a week later. And I put my name down and sure enough, they came. The engineering manager came from Superior and interviewed me. And then I was called a week after that to go to Superior, Jackie and I, to interview in person in the office. And a few days after that, I was offered a position. Ironically, Lakehead Pipeline, which is now known as Enbridge, at that time was 70% owned by Exxon through their Imperial Oil Canadian subsidiary. And so, but I hired on with Lakehead, didn't know anything about pipelines, except I figured they were round and they move stuff through them, liquids and gas. Didn't know a lot other than hydraulics courses and things like that. But it was in Superior, Wisconsin, which is across the river from where Jackie was born and raised in Duluth, Esco, Minnesota. That was just the hand of God. It really was.
Absolutely.
And so I accepted the job, and they said, we'd like to pay for your move. And I stifled a big laugh because we had nothing. We had nothing. And so, well, that would be just fine. And he said, what do you think it's going to cost? This is the personnel manager in Superior. And I said, well, I don't know. I suppose I need a U-Haul truck and I need this and that. Whether he says, I'll tell you what, I'll send you $600 and we'll see how that goes. And so in June, early June, Brad had been born as Mount St. Helens was exploding, by the way, mark that. Literally the morning that Mount St. Helens exploded, of May 18th of 1980, Brad was being born in Michigan.
By the way, I can just about see Mount St. Helens outside my window here. So that's where I am in the world.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. And so sure enough, I rented a U-Haul truck and I hitched to drag my Chevy Nova behind it. I got a receipt for $10 for what I paid my brother-in-law, David Barney, for labor. It says David Barney, labor, $10 to help load the truck with furniture we bought from a Christian man who had a furniture store. And away we went on the 6th of June to Esco, moved there, and I started work on June the 9th. The end of the story, by the way, is of the expenses is that the total move, including gas for the U-Haul and everything, was $487. And I was holding $600 of Lakehead Pipeline Company's money.
Right.
And so the first time I walked in, I had a check for 113, which they just about fell over because they figured I'd walk in and say, actually, it was $1,100. Can I get another? And I thought, no, it cost $487. I still have that expense statement. and I gave him a check for $113. And that was, I just felt that was what I should do.
Yeah. So
$487, the first move. Typically when we move people now, especially across country or across borders, it's between $50,000 and $80,000 to move an employee, including everything and whatnot. So I just find that really humorous that it was $600 and or $487.
Covered it just well. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. And that was you said 1980 when
it was. That was June of 1980.
Yeah. My sister was born that year. I was born the year after. I'm a little younger than Brad. But yeah. So you start this job here. Obviously, you have a young family, and it's a whole new world for you here. What was that like coming into? I mean, it's a big company. I mean, this is the biggest or one of the biggest pipeline companies certainly in North America, maybe the world, and you're kind of like dropped into this culture and this system. What was that like?
That was really something. I had no experience in pipelines, and I was put into the engineering department as an engineer C. I'll come to why that's important, because there is no engineer D. You can't get hired any lower than engineer C. And I started learning the pipeline system, and there was one of the senior managers that really felt strongly that new engineers should get a rounded education. So they put me out working with mechanics, and then with electricians, and then with pipeline maintenance crews, and they did a bunch of rotation like that while I was doing classic engineering work on various projects and whatnot within the pipeline system in the U.S. And got to learn, what the company was all about, and why it existed, what its history was, starting in 1949, and it was just fascinating. And of course, we were so deeply thankful to have a job in a place where we could actually live, that we really felt overjoyed by that, living back in Jackie's hometown. Basically, they had moved to Michigan when she was 12, but she was born and partly raised there in Esco, and there we were. And so I was just so thankful to go to work every day, that because it was just really something. I was 22 years old, and a family now of two kids. Jackie and I had Mandy and Brad, and it was just those were wonderful times. They really were. And as time went along, I started getting put into positions of supervision of other engineers and things like that before 1987, which was the first big move with the company geographically to Bemidji, Minnesota.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me about that. So obviously in these big companies like this, small business, you're probably going to be sticking around the same area for forever, pretty much. But in a big company, there are needs from, your nephew, Daniel, and my sister just moved to Georgia, and it was a similar situation. He's an engineer for a big company, Solvay, and they had a need over there. And so they moved across the country. So that's a little bit more of it's a thing within a, bigger corporations like that.
It is. And there was one senior executive that really felt that I should be in operations management. And so really I left the classic engineering profession in 1987, only 7 years after I was hired on. And they offered me the job of the assistant district manager in Bemidji, Minnesota, which was the largest district in the company, that covered North Dakota, Minnesota, and about half of Wisconsin, headquartered in Bemidji, north central part of the state. And that was hard. We were loving it in Esco there. I was generally loving, what I did, and wow. And of course we prayed a lot about whether we should make this move. And I told the company, that executive particularly, I said, look, we will go. But we want to be back in 2 years here. And here's another little point. You don't always know what you think you know. Because fast forwarding 7 years later, they had to dynamite me out of Bemidji, Minnesota. There was no more desire to go back to Esco or Duluth or anything like that. And so I asked for a 2-year deal, and he nodded, and probably knew that, that would, he felt that once I sunk my teeth into operations management, I think. So I was the assistant district manager for a year, and a year after I got there, the district manager was transferred up to Edmonton, Alberta, and I became the district manager when I was 30. And that was a real eye opener with crusty pipeline crews, welders, equipment operators, electricians, mechanics. And I learned a lot about human nature in a hurry, managing a district like that. We were, when you live in Bemidji, Minnesota, you always think about buying a boat and living on a lake. And so we had our eyes on boats. And one evening, Jackie and I were in town, and Jackie said, "There's a really nice boat It was a decent fishing boat, probably a Lund, which everybody in Minnesota
Oh, yeah.
would have.
Yep. Sure.
A nice boat on a trailer. And I said, that is a very nice boat. There's only one thing I don't like about it. And what's that? It's the Lakehead Pipeline Company truck that's pulling it. That's what I don't like about it. And so I had to go to that electrician and say, what are you doing pulling your boat around with the company truck? And I learned about how people rationalize.
Okay.
He said, look, I'm on call. He says, I've got to have my company radio and my company truck, because if I get a call out, I've got to have all of my stuff. And so that's why I have to use the company truck, because I wanted to go fishing in Lake Bemidji. And so I need my company truck and my radio. And so interesting, there you are, you're 30 years old, and this guy is telling you the way of the world. Well, we didn't, after that, we didn't pull boats around with Lakehead trucks, but that was just, that was a real learning experience. And frankly, I loved it. I really did. It was, except for March 3rd of 1991, when the largest inland oil spill in the history of the US happened, which we can come to if you like. But
it's on my list.
Okay.
No, maybe not that particular one, but I definitely want to talk about stuff like that for sure.
Yeah. So that was a whole new experience. It was really, and the engineering background helped, because I understood what was going on physically with the company, and I just had to understand better what motivated the people, and where there were old timers. I learned the phrase, the all-time phrase, after coffee, because did you know that that's when work is always done? There was old mechanics, no matter what they wanted to do, their answer was, or what they were told to do, they said, we'll get that after coffee.
After coffee.
And wow,
first we have coffee.
There were so many learnings. One time, I won't bore you too much, but a quick story. So one of the things that really got me was, there was this electrician. He was probably 55 years old. And he called me up one day and he said, Steve, my neighbor died. And I said, I'm sorry to hear that. He said, his wife has asked if I would sing at his funeral. And it's over in Roseau, which is about 80 miles, 70 miles from where he was located. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. I guess you can take the day off, use it as either a vacation day or a personal, day, and go and sing away. There was a pause, and he said, well, I think I'll tell her I can't do it. I thought, what the heck?
Yeah.
Well, I know now what the heck. He wanted to take his company truck on company time to go and sing at his neighbor's funeral. But when I said, take the day off as a vacation day,
it wasn't so important anymore.
It wasn't so, what a precious neighbor.
Wow. Right.
And that one just kind of stung, because I thought, wow, you bugger. If you could have used the company truck and company time, you're happy to go over and sing, but not otherwise. So anyway, it was a lot of learning between 1987 and 1994 in Bemidji.
So I didn't realize you were there for so long, in Wisconsin, Minnesota area. Now I don't want to get ahead of myself, but at some point you moved to Canada. Was that the next move, or were you, was there another stop along the way?
No, that was the next move.
Okay.
I think we were happy in Esco. We were outrageously happy in Bemidji. The kids loved it. I loved my work, and Jackie enjoyed it. We got to know the Ahos and others down at Wolf Lake, Spruce Grove, and other Les and Marcia Hansen, became good friends there. And so that was just a place that I felt like, I'm going to stay here forever. And there were 2 attempts made to move us out of there by the company. And I basically said, listen, I will become the greatest trainer of people you ever saw. Just keep sending them, and I'll train them as best I can. But leave me right here. I'm really. And then finally, the call came in early 1994, where I realized I'm being selfish. I'm a long way from retirement. I can't just plug up this key spot for development of people. I'm going to have to. And so I became vice president of operations in Edmonton, Alberta, which was a big move. Mandy was in the 10th grade. Brad was in the 9th grade. Our son, Nathan, who we lost in 2009, as you know, he was in the 4th grade. And Emily was 4 years old, having been born in Bemidji. And you're moving across the border. And fortunately, we had known for years the people at Sylvan Lake, Hillens and Stoudingers and others.
Yeah.
And so that was a tough move, but you know, God worked that in a gentle way, because he worked with both of our hearts, Jackie and I, in preparing us for that. And one night when the actual offer had been made, will you come to Edmonton in this position? I went home, and Jackie and I took our usual evening walk, and I said, well, and she said, they want you to move to Edmonton, don't they?
She knew.
And she, in her own heart, had already been prepared for that. So, so we made that move in the summer of 1994.
94. Yeah, that's a big change. And just so I have the timeline right, at some point you started preaching. Was it early on? Was it later in this?
Oh boy, that was back in ESCO.
That was in ESCO. Okay.
When I was 28.
When you were an engineer C, or maybe you'd been promoted by that point.
Well, just to finish that story.
Yeah.
One day when I was an engineer C, sitting in my office in Superior, one of the older senior engineers walked in. Sticky notes had been invented by then, by the way.
Yep.
And he took a Post-it note, and he took a picture off my wall, stuck the Post-it behind it, hung the picture back up, and walked out. Never said a word. and it said, so I ripped the picture off the wall to see what he wrote, and it said, Steve Wuori, engineer B, and it gave a date, which was some distance into the future. So I go storming down to his office. Ed, what are you talking about? He said, everything is predictable, Steve. Everything's predictable. That's the date you'll get promoted. And I thought, oh man, is that deflating? Like, is like a train on a track or
right.
Or what? And but yeah, in his view, that's how it worked. It was just going to happen on a timeline. He was wrong, by the way. He was way wrong. But anyway, that was But when I was an engineer C, still, Ralph Davidson, who many remember, he was coming to do Bible studies, and he was preaching in Duluth church and other things, and he basically wouldn't let me go in terms of saying the prayers and whatnot, and I didn't appreciate it at all, and yet he just sort of quietly and relentlessly kept asking and whatnot. Ironically, the first sermon that I preached was not anything to do with Ralph Davidson. It was in a place called Trout Lake, Minnesota, Trout Lake Congregation. And all the way there from ESCO on a July day, I was hoping either my Chevette would crash or all the wheels would fall off or something would happen. But that was really in July of 1987.
Okay.
Was really when I started speaking. And then I would drive a lot around Minnesota, both from ESCO and then from Bemidji, speaking in various congregations.
Yeah. So that kind of puts a timeline on this. So that's another responsibility you had during this time as well. So you were promoted to VP of operations, which is, I mean, that's a big move. Obviously your move from the sort of the engineering individual contributor track to more management and specifically operations. they liked what they saw. They then moved you into that role. And so you had a big change in two ways, obviously moving your family, not just to another state, but literally a different country. So a whole another ball of wax here. And also taking on a very different scale of responsibility once you landed there. So just talk about that when you landed in 1994 in Edmonton.
Our family moved in July of 94. I went up by myself May 1st, where the CEO was getting together all of his newly appointed executives. There was a retirement of the previous CEO had moved on, and so this the new CEO and president was getting together all of his new executives. He wanted us to meet on May the 1st, which is when I started up here. And we went through what we needed to do in terms of organization, staffing, and everything else. And I walked out on the street that night in downtown Edmonton with all these tall buildings around, and I cried because I thought, what have I done? What have I done to my family? Why am I in a place like this? Bemidji is just, like Norman Rockwell, picture perfect little town. And now I'm in the middle of all these skyscrapers, working in one, in fact. And I thought, I just was really burdened by this whole thing. And I resolved to talk to my new boss, the president. And because there was another thing bothering me, and that is that now that I had moved into the executive ranks, I was 36 years old at that time, I didn't know what I was going to be expected to do from an ethical perspective. You wonder about senior executives and how much they have to compromise and bend and all of this. So I thought, well, before the family moves, I have to know. I have to know. So the evening after, I think it was, we were both on the floor where our offices were, and it was just he and I. And I walked into his office, and I said, Pat, I appreciate being here. Thank you. I said, but I'm not sure if you know what kind of a bargain you got. And he looked at me, and then the hard part started, because I said, you may have heard that I'm a religious man. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but my faith is very important to me. And I said, and I want you to know that if I stay here, every decision I make, I hope, will be guided by that faith. Because I thought, hey, if it's not a fit, my bags are still at the Hotel McDonald. I can get on an airplane and be back in Bemidji in no time. And he looked at me and he said, Steve, and this was one of the greatest moments of my entire career. He said, Steve, can I tell you that it is not in spite of those things that you are here? It is because of them. And I felt a huge weight lift off of my shoulders. And from that day on, I just knew that I could be myself, no matter what happened in the future. I knew that I could be myself authentically, because it really concerned me. How would it be if 6 months down the road, we come to some dicey ethical situation and I have to declare that I can't do this or can't do that? And so that was just tremendously, not a Christian man himself, but for him to say that just meant everything to me in that moment. And we made the move, and time went on, and I really felt that was God just quietly saying, no, just, I have you where I want you to be. Now just do what you need to do. And that was very, very comforting. But that was the big move in the summer of 1994. And of course, getting involved in Sylvan Lake congregation, I
Mhm.
began speaking there. Dick Judy and George Stoudinger were the speakers at the time, and I kind of wound into the rotation there at
Mhm.
Sylvan Lake, which is where I'm sitting right now, by the way, not in the
Oh,
church, but
okay.
in Sylvan Lake,
Yeah.
Alberta.
And I think that was around the time that I would, first got to know your son Nathan, and because we went up there for fall services or something. My mom and dad, of course, Ron and Elizabeth Holmgren. I know that you and my dad have been close for many years and know each other really well.
Yeah.
I got a chance to get to know Nathan, of course, who was sadly passed away, but and of course, others, the Hillman, Bryce Hillman and others in the area. So that was one of my favorite places to go, was Sylvan Lake, and see all those cool, the buddies that I had up there. And yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I even went to your house at one point, where you and Jackie had a place one time. I don't remember exactly when it would have been, but it was sometime in that range. So yeah.
We lived 6 years in Edmonton, and then I was
Mhm.
transferred to Calgary.
Okay.
Which is it's an hour and a half from Edmonton to Sylvan Lake from the north.
Mhm.
And then we leapt right over Sylvan Lake and went to Calgary, which is an hour and a half coming from the south. So always driving an hour and a half to church, like I did as a kid.
Yeah.
We were 2 hours north of New Ipswich.
Yeah. So the VP of operations, I actually do want to go back to, if it's okay, go back to that oil spill you mentioned earlier, because this is where you're starting to get to the point where, I mean, both in your capacity at the time, which you weren't in Edmonton yet, and also later, you had these situations come up where there'd be big oil spills, and I don't know what other types of disasters would happen, but we're talking about big pipelines that are moving lots of flammable, hazardous material many miles, so things can go wrong from time to time. And just talk about what happened with that first one that you were involved with, and then maybe like just in general.
Sure. Well, the system, and this comes to this question of pipelines and reputation and whatnot. The system is huge. It moves 7 million barrels per day around North America. And over 3 million of that is coming from Canada into the US. And there's tens of thousands of miles of pipeline through most of the states and most of the provinces in Canada. And even though the safety record is 99.9+% of the time, when something happens, it's bad. And so March 3rd of 1991, we were over in Michigan at my in-laws, Dick and Betty Barney's, and I got a call saying there was an oil spill in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And I was district manager at the time. So they sent a plane over to pick me up and fly me directly to Grand Rapids. And I flew over. I asked the pilot to do an orbit over the site and the scene. It was dark by the time I got there on a Sunday night. And I asked him to go and give me a little orbit to see what was going on. And all I could see in every direction were flashing lights. And I had this sense that, what am I going to do? And I don't want to do this. And those times in your life sometimes come where you are pinned to the moment. And regardless of what you would choose to do, it isn't your choice to make. We landed, and the news crews from Minneapolis were landing right behind us at the Grand Rapids airport. And it was a circus for the next month plus, cleaning up the spill, dealing with the media, dealing with the governor, dealing with everything that I never signed up for.
Right.
You go to engineering school and you think, I'm going to do engineering. and all of a sudden you're on TV and there's news crews and helicopters and visits from politicians and relentless criticism, even in 1991. relentless criticism from every environmental group imaginable. And at the time, it was the largest inland oil spill in U.S. history in that area of Minnesota. And I won't bore you with all of the detail. We actually made a video out of it that I narrated because the Alaska North Slope Prudhoe Bay oil industry, BP and Exxon and those guys got wind of this spill in winter conditions and spring conditions coming, and they wanted to know, how did you handle it? Yeah. So we put a video together in a slideshow, and I went to Alaska and did presentations across the North Slope and in Anchorage about what we did. But there was just this sense of, I just don't want to do this. I don't want to face this. But when you got it to face, you face it. And so that was a terrible time. It really was. But you know, God gave strength and wisdom and guidance and also temperance and patience that, you know, there were people who were emotional in every possible direction. And we had one guy that was above me in the company, the executive that actually transferred me to Bemidji. And he actually felt like the best thing I could do is light a match, because in Texas, where he was from, that's what you do with oil spills. And he said, Steve, I believe you ought to have a wiener roast. And I knew I'd spend the rest of my days in jail if we burned the place down. But he said, that's what you do with crude oil. Wow. And so anyway, I had to resist that internally and externally. And that was a tough month, but we came out of it fine. And actually, if you're in Grand Rapids, Minnesota today, there is no evidence whatsoever that anything ever happened. And I'm really grateful for that.
If you don't mind just obliging my curiosity on this a little bit, like what caused that particular spill, and just in really broad strokes, how did you get it cleaned up?
Yeah, well, what caused it was a phenomenon called narrow axial external corrosion, which was basically the pipe, which was 34-inch in diameter, had a seam running down the side, and the coating had a little tenting over the seam. There was a void, and in that void, moisture collected, and over time, corrosion happened right along that seam. And so with pressure variations and whatnot, it actually burst open. And when a line that's moving that much oil bursts, it's at 600 psi probably at that time, and moving a lot of oil. You've got a lot of oil out in a hurry. And wow. We had to stop it from reaching the Mississippi River, because there was visions of the cities of Minneapolis, St. Cloud, and St. Paul all take their water from the Mississippi River. And then we just couldn't let any oil get to that. It was in a river that fed the Mississippi called the Prairie River, and we had to cut all the ice out of that river and skim off the oil before it went further downriver. And we had to clean up this big marsh area and land, and just a lot of different things that just were, hundreds of crew of people working on it, and equipment, and just a full-on assault to get it cleaned up, and of course the pipe repaired and so on. Just a kind of a how things go, in society. That was Sunday night. We restarted the pipeline itself on Thursday of that week. We had a similar spill in southern Michigan in 2010, in July of 2010. And politics kept that line closed for 9 weeks. Okay. So
very different story then. Yeah.
Very different.
That's incredible. Did you, like, internally in the company, did you have policies or guidelines where you could kind of like, okay, in case of an oil spill, you do XYZ checklist, or were you kind of having to react on the fly?
Well, there's always training, and there's manuals for spills on land and spills on water, and the crews do a lot of joint, exercises together to corral oil and whatnot. So there's always that training. But this Texan who was my boss, my boss's boss at the time, actually, I guess he was my boss. He, you won't you won't impress a Texan very easily. And he said, Steve, he came to visit the site, and he said, I'll tell you what, I've had oil on the ice, I've had oil in the swamp, I've had oil on the water, I've had oil all over the land. And then he stopped, and I thought, Benny, don't even act like you've dealt with anything. And he said, but not all in one place, though. And we
Not
had
all
it
at the
all
same
in
time.
one place. And it literally
Wow.
was just fly with your instinct and with
Yeah.
recommendations from people and ideas, as to what to do. We had 100,000 tons of contaminated soil stored in a big pile cell that was lined like a landfill. And what are we going to do with that? We calculated that with an incinerator, it would take us a couple of years to incinerate it all. And then we looked over next to Grand Rapids is this great big monstrous coal-fired power plant run by Minnesota Power, Cohasset Power Plant. And we went over there and talked to their management and said, listen, how about if we give you some fuel, some crude oil? The problem is it's all in dirt. But we worked out a deal for them we would truck it over, and they would blend it in at 10% or less of the coal stream into the power plant. And it disappeared completely, got burned up. The crude oil in it was partially fuel. They gave us a little credit for that. Yep. And there was no more to deal with. And so that was an idea that just,
that's a great idea.
Up. Hey, what's that big power plant over there doing? Wonder what they burn.
Yeah. And then blending it in, totally. Obviously it probably couldn't just run solely on it, but it's extra fuel for them and lowers their costs. Yeah. That makes sense. So then back to, I guess, Calgary at this point, then you continued to serve there. Did you have additional roles there while you were there?
Yeah, well, in Edmonton, another tough move was I was president of the pipeline system in Edmonton in 1997 until 2000. And then comes the call, would you come down and run corporate planning? And I just didn't want to do that. I just was loving the operating side of the business and all of that. Will you run corporate planning? Oh, man. So again, a lot of prayer. And I took a couple of months off, and Jackie and I bought a place in Calgary, and we moved, got all moved down and adjusted to the new city and everything. We were outside of the city, but we and I ran corporate planning for 3 years, which was a small department doing the planning for all of what the company is supposed to do. And then comes the biggest question, the least likely question of all of my career, and that was in January of 2003, when the CEO said, I would like you to consider being the CFO. So I'm an engineer. I'm not an accountant. I don't have a finance degree. And you want me to be the chief financial officer of one of the largest companies in the country, publicly traded. Right. And I was terrified. I was just terrified. And I took the job. Again, it was one of these things where it just felt like, no, do it. Just do it. And I got all of my direct reports together. They were all vice presidents and whatnot the first day of that job. And I said, listen, I'm going to make you a deal. I said, you tell me how the financial guts of this corporation work, and tax and investor relations and everything else. And in exchange, I'll tell you how the pipeline system really works. And we just had a beautiful relationship. I was CFO for 5 years. And some of the best times I ever had in my career were visiting analysts from Fidelity and Goldman Sachs and overseas and all over the place that were investing in the stock, or we hoped would invest in the stock, and telling them the story of what we were doing. And they had tough questions. They're bright people, knew the company as well as I did. And they would just fire questions, and I just loved it. I really honestly did. But that's the least likely path for an engineer ever, is to be the CFO of a publicly traded corporation. And that was for 5 years.
Yeah, one thing I really loved about what you said there was you kind of recognized what you brought to the table that was different, that was unique to you, and whether they intended for that to happen or not, they may have. The big thing was that you recognized the value of knowing the pipeline itself. Like you had worked with the mechanics and electricians and the operators of all of these things closely. You had also obviously the engineering side of things, operations side of things, bringing all of that in, but not coming in saying, this is how the financial side's going to work, because it wasn't your background.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And trusting your people, trusting, you're here because you're good at this. I can bring this perspective, but you can bring this back to, and together as a team, we can work, we can be very effective. I really like that. I think that's something that people can see. Like, my company, obviously a very different size than what you're dealing with, but I, as a software engineer, was not trained for a lot of the things I've done over the years.
Yep.
And but it very much was like being able to trust my people and put them in positions to succeed, and it's a team effort. It's not just me pushing it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And recognizing what it is that you bring, as you said, Jamon,
Yeah.
And what others bring, and recognizing you will have to make the decision, but there is so much input, and as CFO, I had nothing to rely on by way of my own background. And I really had to trust them. And I remember calling in the vice president of tax, and I said to her, I want to know what all of our tax structures are around the world. And I want to know two things. Are they legal, and are they ethical? And she took me through all of the tax structures of the corporation. And it was, things like that I just didn't know. I didn't know, but I needed to know, to have the confidence then to stand in front of investors and talk about what it is that we were doing. And I will say that when I was retiring, just fast forwarding to 2014, I met with large groups of employees and small groups of employees. And what I told them all is, I said, I want you all to know that in 35 years, I have never been asked to, expected to, or allowed to do anything dishonest or unethical. And I'll tell you that no matter what your career is, if you have that to stand on, that's a God-given blessing. To know that I don't have to be looking over my shoulder. We haven't done anything dishonest or unethical. And I wanted the employees to know that when I was retiring. Yeah,
we have a saying that we tell people at my company, and that's, you'll never get in trouble for telling the truth, even if it makes us look bad. Because at the end of the day, we have to own up to where we are, and we don't want to be dishonest. And I think you get better results in the end anyway. Like you might get short-term gain for being dishonest, but just even from a business standpoint, your reputation matters. I do have a couple of comments here in the chat. Arvo Ornoma says, Steve, I met you at the Spruce Grove Apostolic Lutheran Church some years ago. We were weekend guest speakers. I remember one of your sermon texts was from Acts 19, 1-7, when you were in Canada. I remember reading or hearing that you were not hiding your Bible from the view of your coworkers. Was there ever an occasion in which you were challenged because of it being there? And also, as you come to know some of your coworkers more intimately, were there times where you kind of felt sore in your conscience for not standing up for the truth? If so, what came of it later as you dealt with Jesus? Dealt with it with Jesus. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, Arvo, that's a great question. And I felt inadequate a lot. And in fact, I was assailed over the years. Am I just another guy in a suit? Because I didn't preach at work. I didn't hide my faith, but I really didn't have my Bible on my desk or anything like that. And I just from time to time I would worry, am I a light at all? Am I any kind of a light, or am I just another guy? And it was actually two things that helped give me comfort over that. One was when Nathan died. And the notes and the calls and everything that I got from people all around the company, and how the comments they made about my faith, and you've never met me, Mr. Wuori, but I want you to know I've been watching you, and that kind of a thing. That was very reassuring to me. And the next time was when I actually did retire. And there were a lot of messages that came, and many of them, were along those lines that it's given me great confidence as an employee to know that a Christian, man is at the head of the company, those kinds of things. But that was not what I felt. I did not feel that very often. I felt inadequate in proclaiming Jesus Christ and his gospel to my co-workers. And I guess it had to be my life that spoke, because I really don't feel that I did. There were times when I did, but not like you would expect, especially not in the positions that I held. You would think, oh my goodness, that's a great platform from which to preach the gospel, to thousands of employees. And I just never felt, that I was very effective in that. But there were people watching, as it turns out, and several would say that. So,
yeah, it was a good question, Arvo. Thank you. I know that that's probably a universal thing, a little bit, like people feeling like what is sort of appropriate, but like you said, you don't always know what impact you have. My sister Meredith asks, do you have an MBA, Master's in Business Administration?
I went to Harvard Business School in 2005, and it's what's called the Advanced Management Program. The company sent me there for 4 months. And that's kind of an MBA in pill form. I don't have an MBA aside from that. I have a civil engineering degree, and then a lot of different places I was sent, especially when I was becoming CFO. I went to the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and I went to Northwestern University and Western University in Ontario. But Harvard was really the time that was a full immersion kind of an MBA experience at an executive level with people from all over the world, executives. They were all senior executives. And I was in the class with the CEO of the Malaysian Space Agency. Now, wow. I'll forgive you if you say, I didn't know Malaysia had a space agency. But anyway, so it's the Advanced Management Program at Harvard that I went through in 2005.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, that is very interesting. One of my former co-founders of my company, he doesn't work with me anymore, but he had a degree from Harvard, and it is interesting the people you'll rub elbows with if you go there. Of course, I didn't get anywhere near Harvard myself, but
well, what's sad, of course, is that John Harvard's vision was to create a school that would train preachers. That was John Harvard's vision in 1635 or whatever it was. Wow. And so it kind of stung in Harvard Square to see that one of the places that students from all around the university, including many of my classmates, loved to go was John Harvard's bar.
Wow.
Yeah.
Little different feel there.
Yeah. No, we could do a whole segment on Harvard and the experience there, because it is quite an institution, and it's just weird to deal with professors who have no budget, and who have their life divided into thirds. 1/3 is classroom instruction, 1/3 is research, and 1/3 is corporate boards or other things. And their funding is limitless.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one. And I want to set this question. I want to set the stage a little bit. I did want to ask what is, I think, on everybody's mind a little bit more recently. Christine Olson asks, what do you think should be done to get gas prices under control? And of course, you were involved in the pipeline side of things, but the oil industry is gigantic. There's a lot to it. So take whatever tack you want on this. Just maybe if you could give us a little more of an industry insider's look on how you view gas prices and how you think about it.
Sure. Well, there is a lot to it, but it boils down to supply and demand, like many things do. And we were involved on the production side as well. We had a lot of, and still have a lot of, offshore Gulf of Mexico platforms that are pumping oil and gas out of the deep water.
Enbridge does?
Enbridge does.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, sorry. After 35 years, I say we all the time.
Even after how many years retired? Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so basically, it is supply and demand, and of course, gas prices, pump prices, move based on, number one, the price of crude oil, which is quite high at the moment, $105, $110 a barrel right now. We haven't seen it sustain at that for a long time. Taxes play a big part and are a big issue. This question of Biden is dealing with of suspending the gas tax for a period of time. And there's also a thing called the ethanol mandate. And with apologies to my corn farmer friends, if there are any,
there might be a few in the audience. Sure.
Yeah. I hate ethanol almost passionately. I really honestly do.
Yeah.
It is not good for engines. It is a very strange fuel. And ultimately we're taking food, which is, we hear, in short supply in the world, to create fuel, which is not in short supply in the world. And so it's this crazy idea, a lot driven by the corn farm lobby, because virtually all ethanol in the US is made from corn.
Yep.
In Brazil, it's made from sugarcane. That's our other source of ethanol. But this mandate increases prices, and they keep trying to push the envelope as to how much ethanol to put in the blend. A lot of us have seen vehicles that have the yellow cap that says E15 or E85.
Yep.
And that means it can take up to 15% ethanol. Don't do it if you can help it, but supposedly it can. And there's always this pushing of the ethanol wall. But a lot of what's involved in gas prices is uncertainty. That is also what drives pump prices, is the uncertainty on the part of the supply chain in knowing what's coming, by way of course, war with the situation in Ukraine and what sources of crude in the world. The crude demand in the world is about 98 million barrels a day. The U.S. produces now about 12 million barrels a day. And so there's a lot of forces out there, and supply constraints can affect the market in a hurry. And uncertainty is really what's tough. And I think right now, frankly, there's a big uncertainty premium in the gasoline prices we're paying, not knowing whether more refineries are going to have to close down due to climate change mandates and so on. Right. One of the big reasons for prices being where they are is we haven't built a new refinery in the United States in 40 years.
I heard that. Yeah, that's incredible.
They're steadily closing down also.
Yeah.
And the largest one on the East Coast shut down in Philadelphia just about 3 years ago now. So you have refining capacity going down. Existing refineries are expanding as much as they can.
Sure.
But when you have a nation whose demand has gone up the way it has, and no new refineries built in 40 years, that's an issue.
It's going to drive prices up.
It will. And the uncertainty about the future and how far the e-vehicle mandates are going to go and so on is really holding the whole market kind of hostage for a number of reasons as to the uncertainty premium that every trader is putting into their deals.
I see. Yeah, that's from what and I'm just a layman looking at this, but it seems like it is complex. You can't really just point to one specific factor and say that's for sure it. There's a lot of different things kind of playing in. But if the president, if you were still, in the executive team at Enbridge, and the president were to call you up and say, hey, what do I do? What do we do? What kind of advice would you give him?
Well, I would have a number of things to say.
I'm sure you would.
let me just say that I would first of all say that you have to take the restraints that the EPA is putting on every new development in oil and gas, and relax those. There's just a fanatical desire to grind everything to a halt through multiple layers of regulation. I would say that removing the layers of regulation that haven't ever been there before would be an important step. Absolutely. And also toning down the rhetoric about the American oil industry and the Canadian oil industry and so on. I think that would be very important, because the mood of the market is clearly affected by rhetoric from government leaders. There's no question. When someone says that I'm going to get rid of your industry, the market will tend to take that seriously. So I would say regulation for sure is stifling a lot of activity. The industry can react if it's given the ability to do so. So that would be one thing I would point to.
Yeah, well, what you just said there, that last bit, the industry can react if it's allowed to do so. That makes sense, because obviously when prices go up, you're incentivized to increase production and get more oil, to consumers. By the way, this is just a side question. When you're pumping, oil through these pipelines, is it pretty much all crude, or are you pumping other types of like actually finished gasoline or anything like that?
Yeah, Enbridge does both.
Both? Okay.
Its biggest business in liquids pipelines is crude oil.
Okay.
But there's also refined products in some of the line, jet fuel, gasoline, diesel fuel, and things like that. The much larger volume though is crude oil of varying grades, anything from very light, high quality North Dakota crude to the heaviest oil sands crude coming out of Alberta. There's which move in multiple pipelines. Okay.
Yeah, this complex system. Let's see. Kathy Bergstead says, thank you, Steve. This was very interesting. God bless you. My mom, Ellen Takunen, really enjoyed it when you were a guest speaker at Kettle River.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kathy.
Norma Sepinen-Thunberg says, what do you do now that you're retired?
The question I was dreading. Well, as most of you know, Dick Judy passed away a number of years ago, and he hadn't been speaking before that. And so I have ended up co-pastoring the Sylvan Lake congregation with Daryl Hillman, who is a younger brother of Raymond Hillman. And so that has kept me quite busy in terms of just the whole church needs and other things. So quite a bit with that. There's also a property that Jackie and I bought here in Sylvan Lake that we've been working on for a number of years doing things. And so that's been a good filler also. But I know people are sometimes curious about that you just listen to the lights hum all day or what, but no, we're busy all the time. And I would say the church and now this property, which is now finished virtually, but that's been a good filler since I retired.
I know we're kind of pushing up against time here, Steve, and I don't want to get in the way. I think you might have Bible study or something that you need to get to as well. But Cody says, if government got out of the way, do we have enough resources in the U.S. to support the country's oil and gas needs without importing?
That is a complex question because energy independence doesn't mean that every molecule used in the US was produced in the US. For example, the largest supplier of crude oil to the US is Canada. And Enbridge moves about 80% of what moves between Canada and the US. So it's always a displacement game. There's always going to be a need for imported crude, but in a balanced market, you're also exporting crude. And so that's where I think we can come into much better balance and it'd be in a much stronger position. The more US production there is, and Canadian, I tend to group them together because they've been allies for so long in the energy space. The more that can be produced in North America, US, Canada, Mexico to some extent, although that's a little different story, the more leverage there is in the market to provide oil to various areas of the world, grades that are needed there, and also to import what needs to be imported. There will always be an import and an export market. For example, in Philadelphia along the East Coast, what refineries are left there really can't access crude that's produced in the US except by rail. And so they rely on crude that comes up from the Gulf Coast and also from a lot of foreign sources, West Africa, Norway, other suppliers, Saudi Arabia, and suppliers like that. So it's always a displacement game. But the answer is that there is a lot of potential that could be unlocked across the U.S. and in Alaska, frankly, which has tremendous reserves that really have not been fully tapped, although they're a long way away.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I have lots more questions. I'm going to try to only ask the most relevant here. Actually, these two, I like to ask these two questions, and I'll just ask them both at the same time. One is, what were the best parts of the job, and then also what wasn't so great about the job?
Well, I think taking the second one first, what wasn't so great was watching the industry that I joined in 1980 go from being appreciated for what we did, which was moving fuel of whatever form to the places where it was needed. And if you look around the world, what brings about prosperity and quality of life? It's energy. Absolutely. It's energy. And so we were much appreciated. And over the years, of course, oil and gas particularly got a bad name. And we at Enbridge, we went into wind and solar in a huge way. Enbridge today has large offshore wind farms off the coast of Germany and France, and in the English Channel between the UK and France. And so so we were involved in the green energy space in a very large way. But to see that everything we did on the oil and gas side was called into question as though it was evil. That was the hardest part of the job, was watching people try to tear down an industry that supplies everything that we need. When you look at where a barrel of crude oil goes, we're talking on devices made out of crude oil right now. Right, it's true. And they would do that while they were using crude oil like crazy. That was what was the hardest part of the job, was probably the hypocrisy of it all. You know, they had a narrative that they wanted to advance. And the best part of the job, boy, I don't know, there'd be so many things. I have just such great memories. But I think the best part of the job was knowing that I was part of building something. And you can choose in life to be a builder or someone who tears down those that build. And to be a builder was just a tremendous feeling. We're building something for the future. We're building something for our society. And the company grew enormously in the 35 years that I was involved and continues to. So I would say just knowing that I was part of something that I could be proud of every day and very gratified by and grateful for. That was the best part of the job. The people too. I just love people. I loved it. Tough ones, guys that wouldn't sing at their neighbor's funeral if we didn't pay for it. and the easy ones too.
Sure. Well, it kind of goes back to when you did decide to go into engineering, civil engineering. You said you wanted to be a part of a profession that would work with tangible things, that would build things. And at the end of the day, you were a part of that, whether it was from actual engineering, which you did for some years, but then also managing the people that were doing that work. It's a very fascinating thing. Thanks so much, Steve, for coming on and sharing your story and your knowledge and everything. Like I said, there's many more questions I could ask you, but I don't want to get in the way of your evening any more than we've already done.
No.
So
No
thanks. Yeah, thanks everybody else also who asked questions, who came along and watched, and also those of you who are watching later. This will be available on Facebook in the group, as well as on YouTube. It's unlisted, so if you go to the channel, you're not going to see this video. However, if you want to share it with someone else, you can find the direct link to it in the comments in Facebook. You can also just ask me, and I'll send it to you. And then you can share it with other people who maybe aren't on Facebook. Thanks again, Steve. Thanks everybody else. And I'm going to
thank you all. Thank you, Jamon, for doing this. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thank you very much.